I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology. Today I'm going to talk about intuition and divination in general, and specifically in astrological prediction. So first I want to start out by, talking about, basically a lot of what we see in contemporary astrology. It means someone says astrology, which is modern astrology, or even when they're talking about traditional astrology, is not predictive. Even though this has sort of been the purpose of astrology throughout its existence, a lot of times what people are doing nowadays is not predictive. And the classic is looking at Einstein's chart and then saying, oh, look, I can see all this stuff in Einstein's charts. Well, we already know what happened. So prediction is not looking at a chart when you already know the result. Prediction is having a chart of unknown events or an unknown person, and then looking at and being able to accurately predict even though you don't know the outcome. So it's certainly possible to make accurate predictions with modern astrology, but it tends to be there are heavily unconscious reliance on intuition while consciously insisting that the technique did the prediction. So we're going to kind of delve into that. In divination in general, I think, again, there's a tendency to either totally rely on intuition or to insist it plays no role at all, that it's all based on technique. In my view is that all divination, whether you're talking about astrology or other types, tarot or being a psychic or whatever, are all have a strong intuitive function. They're blended together with technique and intuition. So it's interesting that when we look at the contemporary approach to astrology, it's in practice very intuitive, without a lot of fixed technique, but then the astrologers tend to be very technique focused. And it really comes from this attitude that there's a particular technique that's objectively best, and it's best for everybody, for all astrologists, for all time. This is the best house system, or this is the best, whatever term rulership or whatever you're looking at, and it's the best for everybody, and of course it's mine. So mine is the best. It makes sense. I tried it 3 times. It was incredible. And you even get, bonus points if you invented it or you're the first person to popularize it. So then that gets pushed. You focus on the technique. The technique is what's producing the prediction, and we'll push that. The other thing is that these techniques all are assumed to work independently. So it's a bit like Tinker Toys or Legos. You can go out and look at any astrological school, any astrological system. You can pull out one particular technique, and then you can just plug it into whatever you're doing, and it'll work perfectly well. In fact, that's how everything works. And really what we're looking at, the astrological technique ultimately is mechanistic. It's like an algorithm. It works by itself. You just feed in the data, you apply the mathematical formula, and voila, then you get that gives you the answer, and that's how it works. And I think this is sort of the modern approach to anything. I think that the view is that there's always some algorithm. You could always use AI or whatever, and it'll always have some mechanical thing that can do anything. And I think really this looks at, the techniques as being like, a mechanical system, basically. But even if you think of that, it kind of breaks down, because if you think about it, if you said, okay, I'm going to take the best transmission, which is a Ford, the best engine, which is a Honda, and the Lexus body, and stick them all together because they're individually great, obviously together they're going to work really well. They'll be the best. The best overall car will come from putting together these individual systems. Obviously that's not going to work very well, because the individual parts need to be able to work together within the system. Again, as I look at astrological methodology, I tend to think of it more like a language. The techniques will be like letters and words or sentences, and they don't work in isolation. They work together in this underlying system. So again, you can think about the example, use the best adjectives, which are English, the best adverbs, which are Spanish, and the best nouns, which are German, and you put them all together, it would be unintelligible. You wouldn't understand what you're doing. It wouldn't work. And so ultimately, I think that astrology functions as a language for the description of reality. And so as you look at each different school, whether you're talking about medieval Renaissance or Vedic or modern, each of those is a different language, and the meaning comes from the interplay of the techniques, not from the technique itself. And you use the technique to look through, again, if you think about the meaning of a word, it doesn't really stand by itself. What does love mean? Well, it very much depends on the context. It doesn't mean it's meaningless, but it's very context-based. And really, we need more than just the technique. So again, in my view, accurate prediction almost invariably is not mechanistic, but requires intuition in addition to the technique. So you can say, what is intuition? It's kind of a broad term. I mean, I think, the underlying, what I would say the meaning of, for our purposes, is probably being able to see patterning. But really, it's a very multifaceted term in the way I'm using it. It combines, your long personal experience. Obviously, if you're someone who's been doing astrology, horary questions or natal charts or whatever for 20 or 30 years, you're going to develop a sense of things. You're going to develop a sense of it that's personal and judgment, personal judgment. But there's also this sense of it being external, that things just come to you. I mean, you don't even know what the source is. It's certainly not from the ego. It's not from any conscious reasoning. It's not from some particular formula you're doing, but it's almost as if the answer just sort of appears to you and it seems right. So there's also this sense of, like I said, getting inspiration perhaps from the anima mundi. Divine inspiration is another way to look at it. In a sense, you're becoming an oracle. And again, this is not a process of A, then B, then C, then D, and in a sort of syllogistic logical formula. It's from A to Z, sort of like instantly seeing the answer. Really what I think intuition is being able to glimpse the underlying patterning. And if you see the spiritual cycles in the chart, the heavenly cycles in the chart that reflect these underlying spiritual cycles that also are governing the events that you're looking at, whether it's a horary question or natal chart or whatever astrological context that you're seeing it in. And you're being able to see that underlying pattern, and by seeing one piece of it, you can understand the rest of it, almost instantaneously. So, really, I think any form of divination requires intuition, and any form can be accurate. Really, it's amazing how many, people are able to do accurate predictions no matter what type of divination they're doing it. I mean, for example, modern astrology can be very accurate. One thing that's interesting is if you can look at and see whether something is sort of technique-based or intuitional-based, depending on whether it's teachable or not, and whether or not the rules are contradictory. I once had an example. I was at a conference, and there was an example from a pretty well-known astrologer, and he was looking at a horary chart, and was like about his mother's house. Would his mother's house sell? So quite reasonably looked at the first house for the seller, the seventh house for the buyer, and saw that they were separating from a square, and that the seventh ruler was afflicted, and said, no, you're not going to be able to sell the house to the seller. He then had this very complex and confusing, delineation of the 12th house, and somehow that showed what the next buyer was going to be like, and on and on and on about the details and what their hair color was and things like that. And then indeed the next buyer was like that. And to me, it's like I could not understand the technique, basically. At the same time, he was able to get the answer very, very close to what actually happened. So again, that to me, it strikes me as intuitive, use of astrology. That basically the chart was sort of a jumping off point. It inspired the person, and they were able to get most of the information was from intuition, even though they were thinking that they were reading the chart. Another example of that is if you look at Lily's Christian Astrology. He has a lost fish, and he has this finds his lost fish and everything, is able to find it. Again, seems very intuitive to me. The lost item rules are confusing, they're contradictory. Different authors have different approaches. The directional stuff, which house or what corresponds to which direction, all is, it's very hard, I think, to do those. I'm not good at lost item questions at all. And I think that's, again, because I just don't have the intuition in the area. Lily did. He was very intuitive about lost item questions, able to do a very good job of finding them. So again, it even in as you're looking at medieval Renaissance astrology, which is heavily based on technique, there's a strong intuitive portion of it as well. So really, as you look at your various types of divination, they are on a kind of a range between very little technique to being heavily technique based. All of them require intuition. That's really kind of the essential for the accurate prediction is intuition. But the technique can be very much an aid to intuition. So for example, if you look at a psychic or someone who just accurately predicts, they're not using very much technique at all. They're basically sort of picking up the vibrations. I mean, maybe they're having an object or something of the person, but very little technique. Tarot's got a little bit more technique. You might do a spread, or you're going to flip a card or whatever. But again, once you do that, boom, you're immediately engaging your intuition, and getting that inspiration. Modern astrology, I think, is similar to that. I mean, again, what you've got a chart, and it's got information in it, but Modern astrology is really, again, based on natal psychological astrology. It doesn't have the kind of incredible technique that you've got with medieval Renaissance. So it's lower in the technique, but again, people are able to come up with accurate predictions from it. And again, the question I think there is it teachable? And if it's not teachable, then you can say, oh, that's intuitional. It doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, I'm not coming in here and making any kind of value judgment at all. We're just trying to figure out kind of the relative use of these things in a conscious way. Medieval Renaissance, as I said, has lots of technique. It's useful. I think, it's sort of like, it's like a ladder. It gets you 15 feet off the ground, but you still got to go another, 10 feet. In the Centiloquium, the 100 aphorisms attributed to Ptolemy, aphorism 1 is very interesting because sort of roughly translated what it says is that your science, your technique is only going to get you so far. But to get an accurate answer, to really nail it, you're going to need to have divine inspiration. You're going to need to, that intuition is going to have to come into it. And I think that's a very accurate, breakdown of the process, that it's both a combination, even in a heavily technique-oriented school like a medieval Renaissance, of technique plus intuition, and those really have to work together. So intuition is very interesting. And I think that, as I said, it's a combination of personal and beyond personal. That really, to be able to do this, you have to access beyond just the ego self. You have to just access beyond just the conscious mind, and you have to get beyond a sort of algorithmic, or mechanistic approach, and be open to that deeper patterning. And part of the problem, for example, with intuition is that finding that clarity. It's very often diverted either by hope or fear. Oh, I know I won the lottery. Well, do you know you won the lottery or hope you won the lottery? It's like, oh, I'm sure they're out to get me. It's like, again, that's a fear-based thing as opposed to the intuition. There is a certain amount of, again, separation from the ego self there. Certainly separation from the desires of the client in terms of what they're hoping or fearing from in the prediction in order to get it done accurately. I think the first step, in working with intuition, and because again, I think that most of us have, I think, the basic talent for it. I mean, some people are better than others. I mean, I'm not psychic. I mean, I really do need the technique to sort of guide me. And it's interesting when I'm doing a horary, I have a process that I go through for every horary. So I fill out the question, the time, date, and place, look at the chart, and then I basically look at this, breakdown in terms of the houses that are involved. I look at the houses for the particular, whatever kind of question it is. I look at those houses, the plants in those houses, the house rulers and their aspects. In a somewhat mechanical way, I just write those down. As I'm writing those down, as I'm looking at, the patterning starts to emerge for me. And then my second step is the analysis. And at that point, my intuition is engaged, and I'm able to go look at that. So that's a good example of, first of all, of how the technique and the intuition work together. Because if I just look at a chart, I'm not able to really do that much with it. I have to have this process of sort of engaging with it and to allow the intuition to manifest itself. But I think the first thing you got to do for intuition is to stop doubting that it works. I mean, if you're all based on the atheistic, unconscious atheistic materialism, where everything's based on energy and matter, intuition's not going to work. It's just not, you're not getting, there's obviously nothing beyond yourself, which is your body, and there's no intuition. So right there, and also it feeds into nihilism. I mean, this whole idea that there's no purpose to anything, everything's random, it's just a coincidence, blah, blah, blah. That's very much going to undermine, your belief in your, really more your confidence. Not belief, because you can believe in stuff that's just not true. This is confidence. You need to have confidence that intuition actually works, that it's possible, that there is a pattern to things, and that you can perceive it. So that's the first step, is to not stop doubting that intuition exists at all. The second step is to stop doubting yourself, because that's easy to do. It's like, oh, I don't know the answer, I got this wrong, and everything like that. And you're not going to get everything right, but that's okay. I mean, it's all right to not get everything perfectly. You need to recognize that you can be wrong too. I mean, that's another thing that's important. If you think, oh, I always know what's going on, you're going to be wrong a lot. So then what you do is, I said, stop doubting the intuition, stop doubting yourself, but recognizing you could be wrong. Then you need to practice. And so it's really sort of paying attention to this sort of gut feeling, to the instinct, and then record it. Write it down. If something happens, you think, I'm really feeling about this, then write it down. And then also you want to be doing real divination. Okay? Again, you're going to practice whatever. If you're doing horary questions or whatever you're doing, tarot readings, do real divination. don't do tests, don't do fake ones. Make sure it's an important issue that you don't know the outcome, and the person you're working with doesn't know the outcome either. So make the prediction, write down that prediction, then check the results. I mean, that's your key, so you're not fooling yourself. It's not remembering afterwards, oh yeah, I really got that right, and you're kind of altering the facts so you can make yourself look good. Write it down. Once you've written that down, you really can't hide from that, whether it's accurate or inaccurate. Okay, so like I said, make the prediction, do it in writing, and then check the results, and then repeat that like 100 times or 1,000 times. I mean, that's really the way to master here. This is not something you're going to be able to, again, a lot of modern approach it has to be quick and easy. You don't want anything to take a long time, rush through this, I got it, and okay, it's automatically going to work, and do some vague stuff that you don't really be tested on. And particularly, look at Einstein's chart, you're never going to be wrong with that. With the divination like this, where you're trying to predict an unknown event that hasn't happened yet, that's where the pedal hits the metal. And that's, you're going to be wrong. I'm wrong. I mean, it definitely happens. But you're never going to be able to get better at this. You're never going to be able to test yourself and understand, and practice unless you really, have a real test like that and do it over and over again. So really what's amazing about this is that we're seeing, like I said, this is astrology as a language for description of reality. And we're seeing the nature of reality. And clearly, if we can predict it, reality must be patterned. It must be, as I said, beyond matter and energy. There's got to be some patterning underneath that. And Plotinus, in his Aeneid, asks are the stars causes, and he says, no. It's not the stars. They're not the direct causes. This idea that they're beaming something at us, or that they're, Saturn is afflicted in the 7th house, so Saturn's messing up my relationships. Saturn is telling you that you have a relationship problem. He's not causing it. He's just the messenger. And as Plotinus says, the stars are these characters written on the heavens, and the reason they can predict is that the cosmos is one great being. And further, if you really understand that, the unity is of, not a universe of unconnected individual beings that there's some connection between, but everything is one. And again, I think the easiest way for us to grasp that is a unified consciousness. So essentially, like I said, what prediction is, what intuition is the application of our individual consciousness to the universal form and consciousness. And really what we're doing is we're manifesting universal consciousness. We're allowing that underlying pattern and form to penetrate into this limited consciousness, the limited I self, and making ourselves essentially able to receive that information. And that's why there's a sense of it being external. That's why there's a sense of it's coming. I don't know where I came up with this, but this seems like the correct answer. It just came to me. Because there's this opening of the ego self, this removal of the opaqueness, right, and openness to the universal consciousness. So that's really how I would say what intuition is. And yet, that sounds all very woo-hoo, very philosophical and everything. It's extremely practical. Because what could be more practical than being able to predict the future? Incredibly useful. Like I said, a horary question, and use medieval Renaissance technique and come up with some incredible prediction. But that's true of any kind of divination. It is amazing the accuracy that people are able to have, again, if they're able to open to the intuition, able to be a channel for that universal knowledge. So I just thought I would share that. Again, like I said, there's this obsession with technique. Like I said, the whole house system thing, it's a bit like worrying about whether German is a better language than French. It's like you can express the underlying meaning in either language, right? It's not based on the technique. There's not a best technique for everybody for all time. There's which techniques work together with you to help you engage your intuition. That's definitely true, but that's an individual preference, and that's something you can learn and you can test through the accuracy of your prediction by, like I said, write down your prediction and then test them against the results. And you really can't argue with that no matter what house system somebody's using. Nor can you say, if I use this particular house system, I'm going to invariably have accurate predictions. Because again, that's going to depend on the individual person and how much they're able to engage their intuition. So I hope that's useful. Again, this is my perspective. This is my approach. If you have a different approach, obviously that's perfectly valid. If this is something that resonates with you, that makes sense, though, I think it's very useful, and it's different from what other people are saying. So I think it's useful to have that alternative perspective. And ultimately, like I said, if we're engaged in divination, if we're engaged in prediction, we want to be able to make sure that we're focusing on intuition and we're developing that as much as possible. And as much as possible, like I said, being that conduit and being open to that universal consciousness.